All right, everybody that's listening, we thank you for listening. Podcast people, like, subscribe, share. If you're listening to us on one of the radio stations, we hope this gets through to as many people as possible. Thanks so much. We do have a returning guest. I've had her on since 2020 when she ran for the brand new Congress, I believe in 2020, against Bill Foster. She held a hell of a race then. She used to be Will County commissioner at one time. Now she's the Illinois State Senator for District 43. Rachel Ventura, senatorventura.com, at Senator Ventura on Twitter. Rachel, it's always a pleasure to have you on and talk politics and everything else in the kitchen sink.
Thank you so much for having me back.
All right, so let's kick this around. Obviously, legislative session just wrapped up. Can you give people listening around the country a little synopsis of what happened in legislative session, but especially obviously the positive achievements that happened during the legislative session?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, I'm a climate advocate. So, some of the bills that I passed this year really focused on that. So, we did the Healthy Forest Act, which actually allows not just forest or open lands to plant trees, but it allows local government to and incentivize them by giving them the dollars needed to plant trees and native grasses. We encourage them to do this along roadways that could help with snow and dirt drifts, as well as flooding mitigations. But then, of course, carbon sequestration, carbon capture is a big aspect right now. And we can kind of talk about what the state did with that. But what this allowed the state also to do is these local governments could go after our state grant dollars and use our state dollars as matching dollars for federal dollars. So we basically could double our money because the Inflation Reduction Act had a lot of dollars for sustainability and programs like this. So our hope is this is, we're starting off small, but our hope is that a lot of our local governments and nonprofits will go after these dollars, plant a lot of trees and native grasses. If it does well and we exhaust the funds, that we can grow this program in the future. Another aspect we did was our state has received a lot of climate bank dollars. So for green and clean infrastructure, this came from the federal government, goes into our Illinois Finance Authority, and we allow local governments, cities, counties, townships, school districts to go after these dollars when they do infrastructure improvements, as opposed to going to bond. So when they go to bond, they have to go whatever the bond market is. So let's say it's 6%. If they instead go through the Illinois Finance Authority and use our climate bank, they may get that loan at 2 or 3%. Then the money and interest rates go back into the climate bank for our state and grows that pot for more green, sustainable infrastructure in the future. So not only are taxpayers saving money, but we're growing that pot for future aspects for other governments to go after. So this was a great initiative that we got passed. We had some bipartisan support on the climate bank. And then there's been a few other things we did. But I want to touch on a thing that I worked on with several progressive members in our state, and has to do with healthcare. So our governor just signed a bill that it's the Healthcare Protection Act. And what it has like 2 to 3 aspects of it. The first thing it does is it eliminates prior authorization for mental health care. So this is really putting the care and decisions back into doctors and patients' hands and removing it from insurance. So anybody who has had to call their insurance to get prior authorization for healthcare knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. Most of that stuff for general healthcare is actually covered by the federal government, but mental health care we can mandate at the state level. So what we did was we removed all prior authorization for mental health care. So if you need inpatient services, if you need a certain type of medication or a treatment plan, insurance can no longer say that they're not authorizing that care. If your doctor says it, you can move in that direction. The second thing it does is it eliminates step therapy. So what step therapy is if a doctor says you need this diabetes medicine, right? Diabetes medicine A. Then you go to your insurance and they're like, oh, we don't cover diabetes medicine A unless you have tried B and C first, which are your generics or your ones that are not as effective. And then after you've tried those, then you can try this one. So we've done away with that. Insurance companies can no longer ban it. If a doctor says you need this medicine, then they have to provide that medicine coverage. And then the last thing we did was we banned junk insurance companies. So they'll sell you like a short-term plan, and they'll say, oh, this has got all this coverage, you pay for a year. And some of those costs can be a lot, maybe not as much as a regular insurance plan, but what ends up happening is when they actually need care, those insurance policies don't cover what they need. Some of them don't even cover hospital coverages. And so someone who thought they were getting health insurance ended up just essentially paying for nothing. So we've banned those policies here in Illinois. And these are just the beginnings of changing the insurance overhead for healthcare in Illinois. And we're hoping other states will start to take a look at this. We also have a Medicaid omnibus package, last part on healthcare, that looks at exactly the prior authorization for the rest of the healthcare coverage. So if a doctor has had 90% approval rating for prior authorization and they take Medicaid, then that doctor can go ahead and move forward without getting prior authorization from Medicaid. And this is the difference between private insurance and state-run programs, that we can trust doctors to give the right care as opposed to putting profits first.
I just want to interject quickly, and sorry to interject here, but I think it does have to relevance to this point on Medicaid. Medicaid, whether it's in Illinois, Florida, Rhode Island, wherever it may be, and obviously Rhode Island's expanded, and I've seen this firsthand when I had an issue and had to go on Medicaid for a little bit. It's very hard to get a doctor in general, not to mention a doctor that takes that type of Medicaid. So what are you guys doing for that? Because I'm assuming if it's in Rhode Island, then it's all around the country for that matter.
Yeah, so part of the Healthcare Protection Act did include aspects of cleaning up records and getting rid of ghost networks, where the insurance will say, oh, here's all these doctors that are in our network. And then you call them and they're like, I'm not a part of that, or I'm not taking new patients. So the transparency of where doctors actually practice and who's available for patients, we're cleaning that up. So it doesn't, so an insurance company or Medicaid can't say, yes, these doctors are on our network, and then you can't get to see them. So I think a part of it is just actually really knowing what these networks look like. So the bill does protect against that. And I do think that, like, we have a managed care system with our Medicaid. So again, making sure that there are enough initial providers, your internists, your family doctors, a part of those Medicaid managed care programs. And then those providers are the ones who are referring you out to specialists and part of that is making sure, again, with the prior authorization, if your family doctor says, hey, you need to go see a chiropractor, that we don't have the insurance company or Medicaid in this case saying, whoa, you have to get prior authorization and we're not approving that. Because then that person who gets denied doesn't go see the chiropractor, then later does something damaging, ends up in our ER. Now we're paying more money because we didn't have preventative care when we should have had it. So by eliminating that prior authorization for the 90% of doctors who have a good rate on that, that means we actually can get preventative care. Now, here's the downside. Since many of those private insurance companies are run, they are under IRSA, which is the federal regulation. We can't do too much with that. So with Medicaid, if you're income eligible, you're actually now getting better care in Illinois than people who are on private insurance plans. So let me walk you through that. Two patients, same issue, goes to the doctor, right? The person on Medicaid, doctor says, great, I need you to go see this specialist and get this care and take this medicine. And because they're on Medicaid now in the state of Illinois, the insurance can't deny that pathway. Now, person over here on private insurance goes to the same doctor. Doctor says, this is what you need. But the private insurance now says, oh, no, sorry, we're not going to give you prior authorizations. You have to go do all this other stuff. So now they're doing a different healthcare plan based on profit only, not on what was best for them. So this is the difference between why we need universal health care, because the government can mandate things that are about care as opposed to dollars. But, in our state, we're doing the best we can, but so much of this is federally the oversight. So we really need Congress to take a look at our healthcare system.
Yeah, the only problem is, who do we trust in Congress? That's another story for another day. We won't dive deep into that today, but that's par for the course. I do want to kind of keep going into this because when we talk about healthcare, and obviously there's a lot of veterans dealing with a lot of issues too, as far as mental health care. I want to dive into the Cure Act for people that aren't in Illinois, or even for people that are in Illinois and that are not following this closely. You've been deep in this Cure Act. So talk about that, please.
Yeah, so the Cure Act is the compassionate use of and research in entheogens. So an entheogen is like a psychedelic. So in this case, the bill is looking at psilocybin, also known as magic mushrooms. Now, there's a number of states who are working on this. We just happen to be one of them. And to give you a little bit of background, during the 70s or the into the 60s, when there was the war on drug and Nixon swept all these drugs up under Schedule 1, psilocybin was a part of that. But through the 50s and 60s, a number of universities, including the federal government, studied psilocybin and LSD and MDMA exclusive, like pretty intensively to see how these products could be used and how it was changing the brain, including trying to brainwash people, essentially. They found out it was quite the opposite, that it was very difficult to brainwash someone because of how the medicine works. And I'll get into that in a second. Mm-hmm. But then they get swept up with Schedule 1, all research stops. Now, fast forward 2012, and research is allowed by the federal government to continue. So now some of these universities start restudying this. And there's been a new emergence of a lot of data that shows that it really impacts PTSD, depression, anxiety, a number of different mental health issues, including addictions, eating disorders, phantom limbs, etc. So there's several ongoing clinical trials that are happening in the United States. Also during that time, Australia was the first country to open this up for mental health care. They use this as a official medicine for mental health. There's a number of other countries that have legalized it or kept it legal for a number of years. And then in, don't quote me on the dates now, 2018, 2019, Oregon passed a referendum. It was a ballot referendum that legalized this for use, essentially. And then Colorado followed in suit. They also did a referendum on the ballot initiative. So no other state has passed this yet, but several have tried. California filed a bill last year, which passed, but the governor vetoed it, wanting to take the decriminalization out of it. Since then, Arizona has passed theirs, and also their governor vetoed it. So ours, we've had some pushback. So we have done a number of things. And let me talk about a little bit of how our bill differs from that. We have removed some of the decriminalization, but we actually we criminalized the business practice of it. So while we would remove psilocybin from Schedule 1, which a Schedule 1 drug says there's no medicinal value. Well, we clearly know there is a medicinal value to this medicine. And so we want to remove that, but we also are concerned that, people, if it's not illegal in some manner, then people will just do it at home or grow it or sell it, etc. So what we did was we put the tax implication on this, that this medicine would need to be taxed. And if you skirt tax law, then that would be a violation. Selling this without a license would be a violation. And the tax penalty can be upwards of jail time. But otherwise, it would be a fine. It wouldn't be criminally illegal, but it still would be illegal, and you could be fined hefty for violating the law. So it's kind of a blended version of the decriminalization aspect of it. Now, why is this medicine so important? First of all, mental health is on the rise everywhere. And that's not just the extremes of like PTSD and veterans, although we do see that. And at this point, the rates of 44 veterans a day commit suicide. And that's up from 22 a day just a few years back. The other thing that's unique about this medicine and other psychedelics is that it mutes the default mode network. So what is the default mode network? That's essentially where your brain is, it's looking at all the patterns and it's making a best guesstimate of what to do. And so we always go to that default mode. And that's because taking in a lot of information can be overwhelming. So the brain starts to like, okay, you don't need to know about that. That's not about survival. And it really pinpoints like what you need to do in that moment. The problem is when we've taken information in from the past that maybe wasn't the best or right information that served us in the future. Perfect example, childhood trauma. How you got through childhood trauma is not the same how you need to behave as an adult when you have more options, but our brain has been wired to how we survived in the past. It keeps doing the thing in the future. And this is where people with mental health issues get stuck, right? They told all the right things. They can be said, do this mantra, do this exercise, but their brain keeps going back to, but this is how I survived before. With psilocybin, when it silences the default mode network, it allows the brain to expand all over and look for new solutions, look for new patterns, take in more information. And if you partner that medicine with ongoing therapy, now you can kind of have a clean slate, and the new therapy can really set you on a better habit, a better pattern that submits that new practice that will finally get people unstuck. And the results on PTSD are really quite remarkable. Even the FDA has given this breakthrough therapy a number of times, as well as MDMA. And so we really see a long-term solution for people who have suffered with mental health illnesses and haven't been able to find the right solution. But there are some risks to these medicines, so it's important to have adult supervised use and ongoing integration and therapy, which is exactly what our bill would do. We now have bipartisan support on the bill in the Senate. We have our votes in the Senate. We're working hard on getting our votes in the House. And of course, making sure our governor will not veto this if it passes both House and Senate.
I'm going to talk about illegal immigration, top issue around the country for most people. Regardless of that, as senator, what type of bill needs to be passed? Because again, we do need immigrants in this country. I see this in the state of Florida. We have a governor that's not too partial to immigrants. Regardless of that, we do need people to pick the strawberries, the oranges, go on the roofs and do roofing jobs. The list goes on and on. So there is a place for immigrants in this country in general. But we do see, obviously, as we have seen in the past year, but even beyond this past year, crime is up, drugs is up. And obviously the social services, not just in Illinois, but around the country for people that, states rather, that are taking in illegal immigrants, it's crushing their social services in general. And this is for people that need it as far as Illinois citizens. So what needs to be done as far as a bill to teeter the line? Because again, we need immigrants, but we do have to be partial to the citizens of Illinois.
Yeah, it's a complex question and answer. So I will start with, this is something the federal government does need to get a handle on, right? I think that's at the end of the day, it falls under their jurisdiction. They do need to handle it. But I will answer from a state side, but I want to be very clear that they need to have an immigration policy that is fair across the board to help people understand how to become a citizen, how to come into this country, how to get work permits, and it needs to be very clear and streamlined. That obviously has not happened, even with bipartisan negotiations at the congressional level, that has not happened, but it does need to happen. So let's talk a little bit about what Illinois has done. And I want to preface that there are, while there are several types of undocumented individuals, I want to point out three buckets. You have asylum seekers who are legally in this country at this time, right? So that's bucket number one. Bucket number two are DACA recipients. These are individuals who were brought here at a young age, had no choice in it, have gone through our schools, have work permits from the federal government, also known as Dreamers. And then you have everybody else who's undocumented for whatever reasons they may be. They may always tell you their visa, or they're married to someone, but they don't have citizenship in the same way other people do. Or of course, maybe they just came over the border and don't have paperwork. Now, many of those individuals do work, they file a TIN number, and they do pay taxes. So I want to kind of focus on the first two buckets that I talked about.
Okay.
Asylum seekers. Obviously, we've been in the news. The state of Illinois that had several buses come here, including a chartered plane that came here from Texas, the governor continues to send people to our state. And it is a political messaging and game that they're playing with these individuals' lives. We have a landing zone in Chicago where these individuals are supposed to be sent to, and they routinely do not send them there. They'll drop them off in other places. They'll drop them off, freezing cold with not even a blanket, and they're coming from warmer weather, so they don't have coats, they don't have, blankets or clothing. I mean, that really is a violation of someone's human rights. You're really setting them up to possibly die or get sick, etc. So while we have tried to make this streamlined and tried to work with states like Texas who refuse to give us information on when they're sending people here, that's how we know this is political game playing. The state and federal government have put dollars into to these services. The federal government needs to put a heck of a lot more. We've been forced to put upwards of $180 million of state dollars into helping house individuals, provide services for individuals, and this can be a contentious argument. In my own district, in the 43rd district, the township of Joliet Township went for a grant, about $9 million, to provide extra support to our social service network that help with all kinds of residents, not just undocumented or migrants. And then they ended up giving the money back because there was so much hate messaging. We don't want that here. If you do that, it's like opening the door for more people to come here. And so the township sent the money back because there was so much fight on this. But at the end of the day, we still had over 2,000 migrants go through our township. So we still had to help those individuals. We just had to do it now without any money. So there's a real disconnect in what's happening and what's being messaged. So at the end of the day, where we're trying to make this work is that while these individuals who are legally here on asylum are awaiting their court cases to decide if their asylum is approved or not for them to stay or have to go back, we still need to provide for those individuals. The federal government needs to step it up, expand their courts to get these cases moving faster and provide funding for states. I was a part of a resolution that we passed this year asking the federal government to move up work permits, because it's one thing when the system went into a place for asylum seekers that they thought, okay, maybe you'd house them for a month at tops and then they would be decided upon and then they could start working, because they cannot get work permits until their court cases are done. In the meantime, it's because of the volume of individuals who have come over, it could be years before these individuals' court cases are heard. And so this is when, we need these individuals working and getting off of the government aid that is being provided. And I think that would help with the rest of our communities that feel, especially like our Black communities, we uninvested or de-invested.
Right.
We didn't invest in those communities for a number of years, decades, hundreds of years. And then here we are helping these other communities. And I don't think it should be a us versus them or this group versus this group. It should be acknowledgement of we need to do better in these communities that we have disinvested in years. But at the same time, we need to make sure we are stabilizing the human rights of individuals who are coming to our country. And it shouldn't be an us versus them, but there does need to be acknowledgement that long term, this is not sustainable for migrants. We need to get them working, get them situated so they're waiting their court cases, not on the government dollars, but on their own blood and sweat, and just like every other American has to do. Meanwhile, we do have to invest in our community. So that was bucket number one. Bucket number two is our DACA or dreamers. These are individuals who do have ability to work, but only at the discretion of the federal government. So what happens if the federal government decides, nope, we're not going to provide that anymore? This is an area that we need to see some type of citizenship options or permanent work visas so that those individuals don't end up having to fall back on state aid. And we have done a number of things to help those individuals in Illinois. We expanded our Medicaid access or healthcare access to undocumented individuals so that they could work, they could be healthy, get the care they need, and not end up in our ER rooms, not paying for bills, and ending up back on the taxpayer. So preventative care, whether it's employment or healthcare, it's the same way. Prevention goes a long way towards making sure that there isn't a higher cost that has to be paid by the taxpayers. So while Illinois is continuing to put a giant Band-Aid on this federal issue at the end of the day, we need our federal government to really create an immigration policy that works for states. And in the meantime, they really need to be funding states who are taking the blunt of this.
Yeah, again, they are, they're burning you guys out with the money. Social services are getting crushed. Again, it's not you're against somebody that's coming from a different country. It's that, again, we got to take care of the people in our own communities first. I think where a lot of people get upset is when they hear about terrorists coming in, when they hear about Chinese men coming in, men of fighting age coming in. We're not talking about women and children. We're talking about men. Hey, I'm a man, but I'm just saying, but go ahead.
Right. Bear versus man, right? But we don't have to get into that conversation. But yeah, I mean, again, it goes to the messaging and the political game playing of this, right? There is a reason they're hand-picking cases to discuss in the news, as opposed to the 20 or 30,000 other individuals who have come here from gang violence, moms with their children who took huge risks to travel 2,000 miles or more for safety because they feared for their life. Where are those stories playing out in the media?
Rachel,
right?
should we be pushing forward as far as citizenship to the people as far as a merit-based? This goes towards the dreamers, of course. There's a lot of dreamers in college, a lot of dreamers that are working. Should people like that, whether they're dreamers or not, maybe they're a scientist, maybe they're doctors from different countries, and they want to come into this country, should they be getting their citizenship first before, the Tom, Dick, Harry that's coming in from whatever country they're coming from just because they want a better life?
Well, I think that there's a way that they can kind of create like a weighted system. And again, the federal government needs to really consider what a comprehensive immigration policy looks like. And I don't think it's a matter of who gets it first. There's a number of processes they could go through that anybody could be working for their citizenship at the same time. But there are, of course, weighted aspects of that. Just like when you go to get your citizenship and you have been here in a legal status, there's a number of things you have to do first to make that happen, including a citizenship test, right? So when they look at a comprehensive immigration plan, they could put in their different markers or different weighted aspects of what that person needs to do to qualify. And maybe it's a different qualification for a dreamer versus someone who came for asylum.
I just state that
they have to get through their court case first and actually be given asylum before beginning the process, for example.
Sorry to interject. I just state that because obviously we need doctors, nurses in this country. We need people that work with their hands. These are professions that we need to survive as a country. That's why I kind of see that merit-based system. Again, as you stated, this is more of kind of a national issue, but you guys as a state are taking the brunt of this more so than the people that are in national politics that they really don't answer to. Yeah. I mean, they answer to the voters, but they don't really care.
And the last point I'll make about that is just going back to the beginning part I made, which is this is a divisive technique that is being thrown at Democratic states to do exactly what it's doing. It's dividing people, right? So what we really need to be looking at, instead of dividing the have-nots, the people who don't have the resources and want the resources, we need to really be looking at the have, right? The corporations in this world, all the uber wealthy who are not paying their fair share. So I guess what I want to transition to is what we've done in our budget this year. So we did pass a $53 billion budget. We had to pass a revenue package to make this happen. And part of that revenue package, or a large part of that revenue package, was taxing the rich. And what I mean by that is we passed a budget that would tax sports betting operators, online sports betting operators, and we did it with a progressive tax. So if they made over a certain amount of money, they had to pay upwards of 40% versus like a lower company that brought in less dollars had to pay 20%, and then there were some ranges between that. We also did tax video gaming, increase the tax on that. And when we taxed the rich, it was what we did was tax dollars, which was so important. And that is that we really put money back in the hands of working class people. We increased our child tax credit by 20% this year and 40% for next year, directly putting money back into the hands of working families. And we know when that happens, They spend the money in our economy, stabilizing our economy. We increase the standard deduction taken on your taxes to cover inflation. We know inflation has been very hard on families. And so by covering this, it doesn't put you backwards, right? We can cover that aspect and increase the standard deduction you take in your taxes, hopefully getting more money back in your pocket at the end of the year. The last thing the state did was we got rid of the state grocery tax. Now, the caveat to this, though, is that the local government, if they choose, can implement that back. But we are hoping that residents really talk to their local elected officials about, the need for relief, from tax relief to the middle class, to the working class. But at the state level, we are doing some really very progressive things to try to make sure people see that the ultra rich have to pay their fair share, and we need a government that works for everybody, and that includes giving tax dollars back to working families so they can continue.
I want to ask you this because as someone that lives in the state of Florida, we've seen an influx of people move, especially during COVID-19, down to the state of Florida from New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. The list goes on and on, even from Illinois. And I know where I live in the state of Florida, we do have that influx, especially during the winter. They're like 6 and 6, 6 months here, 6 months in Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan. The list goes on and on. Are you seeing the loss in tax revenue from people that maybe were well off that during COVID-19 moved down to states like Florida, Texas, and other southern states?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, our census numbers did go up. I think who left the state is, it's really the discussion we need to be having. So college age students left the state, and several of them did not return to our state. So they're not our high earners, right?
Is this a lack of jobs why they're leaving, or what is the reason?
I think some of it is the colleges and maybe the belief of jobs, right? But there's also this idea, I want to go work somewhere else. I want to work in a warmer climate. And they're not always being attracted back. Or by the time they do, they're much older. And then by then they do have a higher earning base. So while we did see college age individuals, leave the state, where we did see an influx were people of color coming to our state. Again, I think as a democratic state that's more tolerant of different cultures and ideas, we become, a magnet for individuals to come here. And their earning potential really is all over the place, right? You've got doctors coming here, IT professionals coming here. We're now trying to bring quantum computing to our state. We've been a front runner, not just in healthcare, but in climate initiatives, including green jobs. And we did that with our Climate Act, our CEJA, renewable energy credits like the REV Act. So, we really are becoming a front runner in a lot of these areas. And then, of course, abortion rights. A right for a woman to choose. We have protected that up and down the ballot, including doctors who, perform some of these services that they can't lose their license, especially if like an out-of-state doctor comes here and works, that they can't then be persecuted. So we're really trying to make a state that protects individuals and businesses. And so I say that because we see an influx of our businesses have grown. I don't remember the exact number, but recently we were, the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois was highlighted as like hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of commerce. They were like top in the nation for that. So we continue to grow as a state. Our businesses continue to grow. We're bringing on new market areas. But I think the messaging is interesting because the other side will say, well, property taxes are too high in Illinois, and that's why everyone's leaving the state. And they're going to Florida where there's no property tax. Except for we don't have service taxes here. The sales taxes are so different. So these other states tax in a way that is so different than Illinois that while our property taxes may be high, when you compare it to all the other taxes that states have, we actually end up somewhere in the middle, right? We're like a middle of the road taxing state, essentially. And so I think when people say everyone's leaving Illinois to go to Florida for the because of property taxes, that fits their narrative. But when you start looking at the facts of it, it's just not true. That's not what the data shows.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. I'll tell you, I love my state of Florida and everything about it, but I'll tell you one thing. We do have a hell of a problem with automobile insurance, where it's really sky high. And also, home insurance is really sky high. And that's due to the hurricane issue. And let's get into kind of climate change. And I got one question on that. I know we kind of tapped on that a little bit earlier on in the interview, but we talked about this in 2020 when you were in as a representative of Will County. You spoke about how Amazon was over there and there was a lot of the pollution over there, very tough to breathe. A lot of people had issues with asthma in that community. Obviously, you're still in that community. Let's talk about that. And with climate change, has there been any movement in that community as far as air quality and helping that out due to that being such a huge industrial hub?
Yeah, so there's so much we're doing. I'm going to touch on a few things. I talked on us passing CEJA, the Climate Equitable Jobs Act. Out of that came these CEJA hubs, where they're training centers to kind of train jobs of tomorrow so that we can move off of fossil fuels and have a sustainable energy sector. I am in an energy sector district. I have Citgo, Mobile. I'm at the border of a nuclear power plant. We have a number of gas producing plants, some old coal ash plants, or coal plants, which produce coal ash, which I'll talk about in a second. So we have a number of energy sectors here, and we are transitioning that to solar, wind. Last year, I passed a bill for hydropower, giving incentives. So if you are a developer for hydropower, come talk to Illinois. We'd like to talk with you. So that's one aspect of really training jobs of the future and training living wage jobs of the future. There is an aspect of DEI on that, making sure that we are going after communities who historically have not gotten access to these jobs, but making sure that they are a part of the future for tomorrow. This is not unlike the Green New Deal that we saw at the congressional level. That I supported before, we're doing that at the state level. So even if Congress won't do it, the state of Illinois is well on its way to trying to impact that. So that's aspect number one. A part of CEJA did mandate some sustainability, moving away from coal plants was a part of that, but also moving towards electric vehicles. By 2030, we're supposed to have 1 million electric vehicles on the road. So we have brought in a lot of federal dollars for charging stations. It looks like you have a question on that.
No, no, no. I was going to ask just about that because obviously we all know that there's not a lot of charging stations around the country. And if you're living in a state as such as yours, that's very big. If you don't have those charging stations, if you get an electric vehicle, it's a joke, to be honest with you.
So in Illinois, the good news is, so I have an electric vehicle and I do drive the 2.5 to 3 hours to Springfield for session. Have not had any issues. There's plenty of charging stations. But I will say that when we did our analysis, there were some areas that needed more charging stations. And since then, we have been awarded several federal grants to do that. Our state is working with, we have an EV department that works with our Department of Transportation to identify where in our state we need more of these chargers off of our freeways. We've had several businesses take initiative to apply for federal, state, and county grants to get charging stations at their businesses. So there are a number of businesses that have this. So last year, we were able to get it pushed through veto session. I passed a zero emissions bill that mandated government passenger vehicles. So if our state government owned a passenger vehicle, by 2030, they would have to transition over to either zero emissions or, and I say zero emissions because it could be, we have hydrogen being worked on here in the state, hydrogen fuel cells, as well as EVs. So basically what we looked at is the government can afford to make this transition. The biggest cost is in making sure the charging stations are there, and we're already doing that. The car cost, there's actually a $12,000 savings on the life of the car over a gas car because you don't have to have oil changes, all those transmission flushes and other aspects of a combustion engine. You don't have those problems with an electric vehicle, and you save on the gas price. And so with the length of it, our research show it's a $12,000 savings per vehicle.
But what about what we've heard in the news? Again, you're there. You can clarify if this is correct or incorrect, that during the winter, those batteries can have some issues and then you're screwed. I have a hybrid and I enjoy that. I like that. But I don't know if I'm 100% sold to go fully. Plus, in Florida, where we don't have those kind of stations, it's kind of foolish. And the state is huge, like Illinois. Go ahead.
I think like anything, education is important, feeling prepared, that it's the right fit for your family, that individuals can make those choices, which again, mandating government to do something versus mandating individuals to do something is a far cry, right? I think that incentivizing individuals to do something, which we've done in this state, we added a $4,000 tax incentive to purchase an electric vehicle or $1,500 for a motorcycle. The partnered with the federal grant of federal incentive of $2,500, that's almost $12,000 off the price of an electric vehicle, and the price is substantially calmed down. To your point about the cold vehicles, there was one charging station in Chicago that had problems, and cars who had gone there to charge, maybe they lived in an apartment complex where they didn't have a charger, and they'd gone there, one or two needed to be towed to another charging station because that one didn't work. And they blew this article up all across the nation. No one in Chicago can charge an electric vehicle because of the cold. It was so blown out of proportion. There was one charging location that had issues. One or two cars had their cars towed to a different location, and it became this like national news of misinformation. And that's really unfortunate because that was not the reality. During winter, I charged my car, I drove my car, I had no problems. Several other people, same thing. So again, education, continue to expand this network, but more than that, individuals just feeling comfortable. Our hope is that as the state moves into these passenger vehicles, it will start to help normalize that. As the price of electric cars goes down and gas prices go up, we need to be prepared for that. But I want to touch on a few other things that we've done as well. I talked about planting the trees, and I promised we'd get back to carbon sequestration, and I want to touch on coal ash really quickly because I know we talked about that before, as well as air pollution. So there have been some federal grants for carbon sequestration, which is essentially taking carbon from the air or a polluting company and putting it in a pipeline and sticking it under the ground. And the thought was, well, Illinois has this bedrock that we can stick everything under, the best state for that. Federal government gave additional tax credits to make this a reality, and companies started pushing heavily for this. However, the CO2 pipelines are extremely dangerous. If they explode, they suck out the oxygen within like a 20-mile radius. If you're in that radius for longer than 7 minutes and you're not breathing oxygen, that's it. You would perish. More so than that, a combustion engine car cannot drive without oxygen. And so even our emergency vehicles could not get to the individuals in that area if this was to happen. There's been a lot of conversation about that. This year, they did pass regulation on a carbon sequestration. Well, I personally believe that this practice should be fully banned. Part of this practice was used for enhanced oil recovery, which if you remember in 2020, I ran heavily on this aspect that we need to stop enhanced oil recovery, essentially pushing carbon into the ground to push oil out. So this bill does ban EOR practices. It also puts a very high safety standard on some of these. So for that and a number of other good initiatives about it. So I voted present on the bill because at the end of the day, there was an aspect of eminent domain that was very concerning. A pipeline exploding is very concerning. I still believe we needed to completely ban this practice, but at least by providing safety regulations, we might be able to tamper down some of that. And in lieu of that bill is why I passed the Healthy Forest Act, which is real carbon capture, right? Trees and native grasses have long roots that pull that carbon into the soil and stay in the soil, as opposed to a pipeline sticking gas under a rock. Well, we all know what gas does. It expands to fill its container. If there's a crack in the bedrock, the gas is coming out of that crack and right back up to the surface. We just had an earthquake. We also had tornadoes, which I'll get onto. We just had a small earthquake. So any earthquake shaking the ground means the gas will release. That's a big difference between the soil absorbing the carbon from a tree versus the gas being under the rock. This is greenwashing at its best. And they're trying to push this all over the country. If your country is looking at carbon sequestration via these methods, I would highly suggest trying to ban it or stop it in your state because it is very dangerous and it continues to allow fossil fuel companies to do what they've always done by putting a nice big smile on their face and saying, look, we're not hurting, we're helping the environment, we're saving us from carbon, but they're not doing any of that. And it really is unfortunate that those bills are passing. Two other quick points. Air quality continues to be an issue in my area. We have been doing air testing and continue over regulation to kind of help with that. The Warehouse Workers for Justice is really taking this on since we have the largest inland port, which has a number of warehousing in it, and those trucks coming back and forth, emitting diesel particulate matter, especially have hurt with asthma. So we are continuing to try to impact that. And then the last thing I would say is coal ash and water pollution. So with our coal ash ponds, this is a leftover from our coal plants. We are continuing to try to fight that to get that out from unlined quarries and stuff that they've been put in, which then leach those dangerous chemicals into our groundwater. We all drink groundwater here in Illinois. It's very concerning. And so we've been fighting to get that removed. There's a couple of federal cases that are happening that we're waiting for some of those rulings on, but we are very hopeful that the direction they've been going is in our direction, which is that coal ash needs to be pulled out of there, put into lined landfills, and protect our waterways. As many other people know, that there is a PFAS issue, which is plastics from the Teflon in our water. Illinois also has some problems with that. We've been tracking that. So water pollution, air pollution, soil loss, it's all happening in Illinois. We've continued to pass bills, especially for the soil nutrient loss, no-till practices, providing composting. That was a bill I passed last year in our energy omnibus, that our government has to first look for composting before composting materials and use those before purchasing other, gravel and things like that might be harmful to the environment. So we're just trying to encourage sustainable practices. We're going to keep doing that. But we just got hit by 10 tornadoes over the weekend. There's 430,000 ComEd customers who are out without power. We're down to less than 11,000 left. This is day 3. They hope by Friday everybody will have power back. But the reality is we're going to keep seeing these microbursts, these derechos, these tornadoes, increased hurricanes. And so we need to be prepared for this. And really the way to do that is to stabilize our economy with sustainable practices, planting more trees, and being prepared for these storms.
Between us and everybody listening, we can do all these things. I'm all for what you're saying. The only way we're going to solve any kind of climate stuff is if we basically do a full audit on the Pentagon, because they're the ones that are creating all the fossil fuel issues. They're the ones that are doing all these things. So, I mean, what we can do, as far as I would say we can do, is just people living in our community, recycle, great. A lot of the stuff that we recycle gets thrown away anyway. I mean, but we can't control it. You're doing great things in the state Senate. There's other people around the country doing great things. It's great. Again, the only way we solve the problem is the Pentagon. They're the biggest polluter in the world. We also have all these very billionaires, rich people in general, private planes. They want you not to go on planes, period. They want you not to use a lawnmower or a leaf blower, but they can go and do a private plane where you and we could drive our car every day for 20 hours a day, and we wouldn't emit as much as they emit in one of their trips, not even all their trips for the year. So isn't it, and I'm trying to be politically correct here, but I believe what I'm saying is fairly true. You can agree, disagree, or be lukewarm or middle of the road on it, whatever you want to say.
Here's what I will say is, look, if tomorrow we ban straws, will it change climate crisis? No. Will it save some turtles? Probably, right? But it is not the actions of an individual who is going to change climate crisis. That being said, it is the responsibility of everybody, whether it's Elon Musk, him shooting his rockets off into the air, or the Pentagon and their military-industrial complex, don't get me started on them, or every level of government down below. We all have to be rowing in the same direction of creating a sustainable planet to live on. That comes with a number of solutions, everything from tackling transportation, agriculture, sustainable practices of farming and the way that we eat our food, locally grown products, for example, things like, obviously, the military-industrial complex, space exploration, all of these things we have to address, whether it's air flights, we're looking at laws on biofuels and what that looks like here, especially since we have a lot of corn and corn products afterwards that could possibly be used for biofuels. Yeah, we are looking at these practices of what tomorrow will bring. There's a movie called Need to Grow. If you haven't watched this for free online, you can do so. And they talk about the power of green powerhouses, where essentially they're burning products like wood products to create biochar. That then creates a compost soil for algae to live in. They then burn the algae, which has a lot of energy to it. And the whole thing is a closed system, and it emits more energy than solar farms do. And, it's a very small footprint. Things like that could be the solution of tomorrow. The reality is, though, that all of us need to do that, whether it's individuals having better HVAC units and spending less money on their energy costs, to bigger, state initiatives, local government initiatives, and then, of course, the federal government. So, no, I'm not letting the feds off the hook on this one. And I want to remind people there's two ways to vote. Of course, you can vote at the ballot box. When you see an elected official who isn't for your platform and your policy, you can let them know by voting for or against them. But you also vote with your dollar. And what you do with that dollar matters, right? What products you buy, what companies you buy from, it makes a huge difference. And I do think the climate crisis is a part of that. So, I personally think we need to move away from fossil fuels. So I have an electric vehicle. People who want to save money and help the planet, they have hybrids, right? So moving in those directions, if it's financially feasible, go for it. People at the state level and the federal level, we continue to make it more affordable, but also encouraging manufacturers to make this affordable for them as well, not just in transportation, the foods you eat, where you purchase your products, all of those things make a difference. So I would just say, try to educate yourself, make individual choices that work for you. Try not to beat yourself up, give yourself grace, but absolutely vote with your dollar and vote at the ballot box. And maybe, just maybe, will get us on a sustainable planet.
Last two questions, just to kind of put the exclamation point, not to be a Debbie Downer again. You're doing great things, passing laws, getting things done with a few other people that are really kicking some butt up there in Springfield. Again, the rich people, the military industrial complex, they don't give a crap. We'll move on. With the last two questions, just bringing up crime. Obviously, crime is a big problem across America. We saw what happened in COVID due to them shutting down the economy. A lot of people, $1,500 for 8 or 10, 12 months is not going to do it for people when the rent is $3,000 a month and up. So people were, down on their luck. They were working jobs. Some people took stuff into their own hands, whatever it may be. Regardless of that, crime has went up. Illinois is 18th in crime in the country. What were you guys working on, and what will you work on next session to kind of deflate the crime? Because you are big in criminal justice reform. So I know this was a big topic for you, and it's been past and present.
Yeah, so I want to touch a little bit there on inflation before moving into criminal justice, and that is that the state of Illinois, coming in January, will have a minimum of $15 wage. Obviously, that is not a living wage, but it is much better than the federal average. Wow. We continue to really try to impact and make sure people have money in their pocket. This is important because at the end of the day, a lot of crime is still crimes of necessity. People believing they have other options or not is a big part of that. And so if they have financial means, typically people make better choices than when they don't. There's a lot of other complexities that go into that: community support, family support, mental health support, etc. But if you don't have the financial means to make better decisions, you're just not going to make better decisions. So that is like the first aspect of what we continue to work on here in Illinois, is to make sure that the middle class is surviving and that the working class is elevating their status so that they have more disposable income, so they can make better choices of whether sending their kids to private school or public school, or buying certain groceries, right? We talked about voting with your dollar. You have to have the means to make those choices, and we're going to keep fighting for that in Illinois. Now let's move over to criminal justice reform. Part of this is about rehabilitating people when they are in our prisons, so that when they get out, we don't see the recidivism, that they come out with a different mindset, of a different path of options. So some of the things that we have done, of course, we've expanded our workforce services. We have really expanded our education options, though. So Stateville Penitentiary, which is in my district, we now have 5 universities offering bachelor's and master's degrees at these universities, so that individuals can educate themselves. And it has completely changed the dynamics of what used to be a maximum security prison is now a mixed security prison with max and medium, based on the behaviors of individuals. As they've completed higher education and more of the population becoming educated, even at a high school degree, the behavior in the prison itself has shifted to the fact that they almost hardly ever have any lockdowns. They don't have the violent like stabbings and shootings you might have like seen in movies. We just don't have that. They actually treat, individuals as humans, both guards, both the COs and the incarcerated individuals. There's a synergy that is happening when you have a different choice to make. They make that choice, right? So we also have mental health services. We're trying to expand services for drug addictions, especially for someone who maybe isn't serving a lifetime sentence, maybe only serving 1 or 2 years.
What about trade schools?
So in the workforce training that we've expanded, we do have, there's a number of things they can learn, right? Mechanics, welding. In our DJJ facilities, we have a lot more. We have forklift operators, a number of like carpentry trades. They also have like barbershop options where they learn how to be a barber. So again, their mindset of you can work, other jobs than what you were doing before you come in here, and we will provide the skill sets for you to do that. We will provide education for you to do that, and that is really reducing the recidivism rate. So when people get out, they're like, I don't want to risk this new life for doing, what I was doing before. That's huge. And I think continuing to move away from the idea of punishment and more towards rehabilitation. So a few of the things we do to make sure recidivism stays low is we passed a bill that says before an individual leaves a prison, they have to have a state ID or a driver's license. Because if you can't drive to your car or people can't identify you, that is definitely a problem. So that's the hurdle number 1. Then we have making sure that you're set up on state aid. If you need Medicaid for health insurance, we set you up on that. If you need SNAP benefits for food access, we set you up on that. We make sure you have a placement for housing before you release, so we know, where you're going. The state of Illinois also has MSR, which is mandatory supervised release. Essentially, people think of it as an extension of parole. And that's up to 3 years after you get released. You essentially have to check in with MSR agents to make sure that you are indeed staying on track. You have employment, you have housing, you have your basic needs met so that you can continue to make better choices. We do have prisons that are called reentry status prisons. So like Kewanee is our first. Stateville's on that list, and as well as a number of other facilities. And they make sure they walk you through all these things before you ever release. They have job placement, where they work directly with employers in those communities, where they train the individual while they're in the facility. Then when they're released, they get to continue working for that person afterwards. So my district office has interns in both our Stateville Department of Corrections as well as DJJ, our Department of Juvenile Justice. I am the first legislator in the United States to have incarcerated interns work in my office. Wow. They don't have access to any constituent services, but they are doing research for legislation. They do a number of advisory panels talking about what's working, like our prison review board, what changes we can make there to streamline things, make it more transparent, as well as things like the bad practices our county jails have been doing and how we might impact that, how juvenile justice has kind of skirted federal law. And we've created changes in our system to be more, to address people's human rights, right? We don't want to be violating people's human rights. And so that's been very beneficial to my office to hear the patterns that exist in our incarceration so that we can change, but also to make sure we want people to feel like they are a part of our culture, that when they get out, they want to assimilate to our society, that they want to follow our rules. And if we don't make a place for them to be a part of that and excluding them, it only creates that chaos, that havoc. If the rules don't work for me, why should I follow them? And we have to stop that. We have to make sure that the rules are working for everyone and that people feel a part of that. And that does mean things like job placement, education, housing. And so we are trying to make sure that Illinois is setting individuals up that after they leave our prisons, they have that. And of course, on the front end, like I said before, improving the quality of life people have, the disposable income people have, so that they don't have to make those choices initially. Expanding mental health care, expanding addiction services, harm reduction, all of that is happening in Illinois so that we can bring those crime rates down.
Let's end the interview with this last question. Try to end on some hope. The country's divided. It's like a sports game, red versus blue. It's like wrestling in general. But people's lives are at stake with the policies that are passed in obviously state government and federal government. What can you personally do as a state legislator to bring people together during this tumultuous time?
Great question. So I'm, an honest politician. So, maybe that's doesn't ring true with people, but that's where I feel like leading by example. Even for people who disagree with me, I show up, I'm authentic, I'm honest, I'm open, and I listen. We may not agree on stuff, but I try to understand the perspective that they're coming from, right? The viewpoint they're coming from. I also root a lot of my stuff in facts, right? If someone says this is happening, show it to me. Show me the evidence. Let's look at these cases. What's happening? And if they can't provide evidence, I start to question, is this just messaging? Because messaging can be very divisive and very harmful. And at the end of the day, just because we message something doesn't actually mean it's impacting someone's life. I want to know what's really impacting people's life. I treat people with respect. I will walk across the aisle. Several of my bills are bipartisan bills. I did this both in the county. I do it at the state house. That, like my psilocybin, the Cure Act. I heavily worked with a Republican veteran to work on the language of this bill, knowing how it impacts everybody across the board. Mental health it's not a red issue, it's not a blue issue, right? Mental health care, anybody might need it at any point in their life, and we want to make sure that's accessible. And when I disagree with the other side of the aisle, I never insult them, right? Like I ask them questions. If I disagree, I present my case and I move on. I think that's a big part of what's happening. Is like there's so much divisiveness that it's like, well, I'm just going to beat down on the other person until they believe what I believe, and I'm going to call them names if they don't. That type of behavior just has to stop, right? Go back to the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. We have to get back to that. Our leaders have to lead by example. It's not going to happen otherwise. And so I do my best to lead by example. I know there's other politicians out there and public servants out there who do that. But I think at the end of the day, continuing to treat people as humans first, before the labels, treat other humans as human beings, listen to them, come at them with a compassionate and empathetic heart, and then the rest of it we can work out.
It's very much like high school behavior as far as the cliques and stabbing people in the back, whether, again, it's federal or state. And I do appreciate you for always coming on here and telling the truth. And I know you are bipartisan because even the water issue over there, you came out with Republicans and are fighting against them trying to raise water prices. I mean, this is something that affects people every day, and that's a water price. So you're standing with the people, and thank you for doing that. And I think that people, again, need to not just vote for the D or the R, look at the person fully and wholly, and then just go with your gut. And that's you. Hopefully you'll make the right decision. But anyways, we do thank you for coming on again, Senator Rachel Ventura. She is the Illinois State Senator from District 43. It's senatorventura.com and at Senator Ventura on Twitter. Senator, thanks so much for always coming on. I'm glad that you've come on so many times and you're a good friend to the program. And thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
All right.